Welcome, everyone, to the sixth episode of our Business Architecture Meets Sustainability webinar series. How can organizations leverage business architecture to enhance and accelerate their sustainability efforts? That's what this series is all about and what we've been exploring from various angles throughout the previous episodes. All essentially based on the premise that business architecture can help make sustainability measurable, actionable, and visible, given the holistic view of the organization and its ecosystem which it provides. In the last episode, we turned our focus to the role that business architecture might play to help shape the path towards sustainable IT. And today we're going to follow up on this conversation to shed further light on how organizations aiming to increase sustainability in IT and by IT, given that IT, as we learned from Niklas Sundberg last time, can both harm and enable environmental sustainability, how organizations can benefit from the use of business architecture in that context. So, who is with us today? As always, it's Wendy, business architecture and strategy execution, thought leader, catalyst, community builder, and I guess I could add more. So great to have you here, Wendy. And there are two additional acknowledged experts I'd like to welcome to today's session, Oliver Kronk and Nana Lumholt van Kilde. Oliver leads the sustainable technology practice at ScottLogic. He has experience across energy, finance, government, and tech sectors. He's a strong communicator and facilitator, director-level consultant, and public speaker on emerging tech, sustainability, cloud, enterprise architecture, risk management, and governance. In 2019, Oliver created a community and podcast series called Architect Tomorrow, which he still runs today, now focusing on emerging technologies, sustainability, and career pathways into architecture. Nana is a sustainable IT advocate and the founder of Green Vision IT, striving to stimulate a fully committed approach to reduce CO2 caused by how technology is bought, developed, and run in organizations today. She's a sought-after keynote speaker, panelist, and podcast participant. Nana has previously held roles as an IT leader and people leader, and worked with solution architecture, IT architecture, domain architecture, and enterprise architecture in both national and international companies. Oliver, Nana, it's really great to have you with us today. I'm really looking forward to the insights you're going to share and the conversation that we're going to have today. To finish off this little introduction, my name is Daniel, and I'm the founder and managing director of Across in the Head, hosting today's event. Okay, well, now that we've introduced today's protagonist, I would say let's get started and dive a little deeper into business architecture and sustainable IT. So what are approaches to help organizations navigate their journey to more sustainable technology? And how is this related to business architecture? So I'd like to hand over to Oliver first to let him share a few thoughts on sustainable IT. Oliver, I know you brought along something for today, which is supposed to help organizations identify carbon-intensive areas in their technology estate and improve environmental impacts. So would you mind giving us a quick overview and sharing a few insights with us on sustainability in IT, which is, I guess, again, how Niklas Sundberg would kind of frame it?
Yeah, I guess there's definitely that, and I guess before we get to that, there's probably some food for thought for architects, particularly business architects, because hopefully you can see the slides. I think there's a couple of sort of statements I guess I'd like to throw out before, sort of showing you the work we've been doing around the tech carbon standard, which sort of helps organizations navigate this space. But I think as architects, particularly business architects and enterprise architects, there's an interesting role that I think we need to play around ensuring that our architectures are moving towards a more sustainable, circular economy and enabling our businesses to be part of that. Because I think if we don't help with that transition, our businesses are going to become irrelevant. Our organizations aren't going to be as relevant as they are today. And I think by the middle of next decade, we're going to start to see firms completely out of alignment with reality. And I think architects are ideally placed to lead this charge on the transition, right? We have the mixture of systems thinking, understanding our industry sectors, understanding the challenges, and critically the kind of the system, the kind of bigger picture thinking. And I think particularly business architects are in a really interesting position to help sort of transition operating models and supply chains and so on, and kind of agitate the organizations we work for to kind of do things better. I'd also say that sustainability isn't enough. I think since being on this journey of discovery, and I've been sort of, I suppose, in and around the sustainability space for quite a while, I think sustainability, it's become clear, isn't enough. I mean, if nothing else, ESG has become somewhat abused and gamed as a term. But actually, it turns out that sustainability is, given the damage we've done, we're going to need to move towards regenerative. And I'll talk a little bit about what that is in a second. But that's going to be too big a leap for most to do in one go. I think most organizations are going to need a roadmap. They're going to need to get to sustainable and then look at getting to regenerative. Yeah, so why am I qualified to talk about this? Thanks, Daniel, for kind of my introduction. I won't repeat the bits you've already talked about, like Architect Tomorrow and so on, but I suppose, yeah, the kind of the different sectors I've worked in has given me an interesting perspective on this space, right? So I spent the best part of 5 years at an energy and environmental consultancy working with the European Commission and clients on things like industrial emissions and CO2 carbon calculators and so on. And then I've worked in the electricity sector and other sectors, and kind of see the problems in each sector, but also see the opportunities that linking up the different sectors can bring. And so that's kind of really excited about the conversations we're having with Architect Tomorrow. And I guess the next point I won't sort of labor too much, but like the main problem I think I see at the moment is that most are fixating too much on one metric. They're focusing on economic growth rather than a basket of improvement measures that Kate Rayworth talks about being donut economics. And I'm sure you've probably touched on this sort of stuff already on the podcast, so I won't dwell on this too much. But what I wanted to do was really talk about operating model contexts. And so what do I mean by this? I mean, we've been through, as a society, transitions previously, right? We've moved from exploiting humans, like kind of slavery and horrible practices like that in the past. I'm not saying it's completely gone away, but we've largely moved beyond that being an acceptable practice. Certainly in modern enterprises, there's not that going on, or at least I hope there isn't. And then of course we went through like industrial eras and sort of extractive type economies. And I think what we're seeing now is the move towards the need to be in harmony with our natural ecosystem. And so this move towards sustainable, but also looking at being restorative and regenerative in the future is going to be where the leading organizations are. And I think this is what's sort of shifting, is the availability of raw materials to create computers, to create the products that we sell to our customers. That sort of raw material linear supply chain approach just isn't going to be by definition sustainable as resources become ever more scarce. And so if you look at things like the circular economy model that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation sort of draws out, when I looked at this, I thought this is fascinating, because for me it feels like as business architects there's a bunch of lessons and I suppose inspiration we can take from this to kind of think, how do I make my business's architecture more circular? And when it comes to IT, and we'll talk more about the IT side of things, how do we think about circularity when it comes to IT? How do we think about extending the lifespan of our technology, making it repairable, giving it a second life, and avoiding kind of waste to landfill, recycling, and doing what we can before that product is no longer of any use. Whereas I think we have in the past got used to just this linear approach where we just extract and we use and then we throw away. And so this kind of general approach of rethinking that, I think, as architects is really, really important. So with that, kind of the interesting piece you talked about, Daniel, earlier is like, as technologists, do we help with technology, or are we part of the problem, right? And so this is the first question I often ask anyone is, do you need to play offense or defense? And I think there's many wonderful ways that technology can help with the sustainability challenges, but the focus of today's conversation is going to be more about that defensive play that we need to make. How do we reduce the impact of our technology? So I'll skip through a couple of points here to kind of jump through into the tech impacts. Now, I know on the previous episode a lot of this was talked about, so I won't cover this in too much depth. But fundamentally, I think people need to wake up. Lots of people just tap away at their devices, use their devices, and don't really appreciate what's going on behind the scenes. And so this slide here is all talking about the fact that we get amazing benefit out of technology in a lot of cases, but there's real physical impacts. And I think over the last few years, we've increasingly been abstracted away from those real world impacts. The kind of shift to cloud, the shift to managed services, those sort of operate models mean that we don't see directly the impact. We don't even see the electricity bill, let alone the kind of waste products that are going to landfill that inevitably are happening as we have a fast fashion for new technology, new devices, new phones, new laptops. What happens to the old ones? Well, hopefully they find a second home, but unfortunately, in a lot of cases, they end up in parts of the world where these things are processed manually, like the picture bottom right shows, and it's pretty horrible when you dig into the realities of the tech industry. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows, unfortunately, when it comes to technology, right? There's a real world underbelly of impacts. And I know you've talked about sustainable development goals, the UN SDGs before. So again, I won't dwell too much here, but there are significant impacts. I talked about the kind of waste landfill. Energy consumption is a big one that people talk about a lot, but it's not the only thing. And so coming on to the main piece, Daniel, I know you wanted me to talk about, which is identifying the significant areas of the tech landscape. That's the technology carbon standard that we pulled together earlier in the year. And we've open sourced this, so we welcome kind of input and collaboration on this. This isn't just our work now, but we're collaborating with clients and other members of the technology ecosystem. And I think the big learning for us going through our research and our work was that the operational emissions, or that electricity usage, is really only 1/3 of the story. That kind of middle column, which I'll talk about again in a second. Upstream is actually really significant. So the purchased services and products that we buy as organizations, they have real impact. And for certain types of device, like a phone or a laptop, 80% of the impact actually comes before you've even started using it. 80% is in the manufacturing, the shipping, the transportation, and the disposal of that piece of equipment, which is pretty shocking. And a lot of people go, wow, and so this is why we need to look at the bigger picture. It's not all about the electricity consumption and the emissions that creates if your electricity is coming from fossil fuels. It's also what's the life cycle of the products that you're using and the services that you're using. So that's this piece here, and that's so in here we have it's a kind of a taxonomy, if you like. It's like a periodic table of elements of the different parts of tech that we need to think about. So you have user hardware in here, like laptops and desktops and printers. You've got networking and infrastructure in here. You've got servers and you've got storage hardware and other infrastructure that you need to run your organization. Then next, what we have is the operational emissions that most people will think of when they come and think about technology sustainability. I think the general narrative I see right now is technology sustainability equals energy efficiency. So many people are talking about that. And so this middle column is about that. So it's not to say that it's not important. Thinking about energy usage is important, but it's just one part of the puzzle. And what we've done is we've broken that down into direct and then indirect. So the direct things are the things that you run yourselves. So maybe the hardware you're running in your own offices and your own locations, the networking infrastructure that supports that, any servers or storage that you're running yourselves. And then generators are interesting. If you have backup generators, and in some parts of the world, actually, compute has to run off of a generator because the electricity grid isn't reliable enough to run 24/7. So certain parts of Africa have fossil fuel power generation running a lot of technology 24/7. Generators are interesting because they clearly are a different greenhouse gas protocol scope. So this on the full version of this is a simplified version. On the full version, we also map this to greenhouse gas protocol scopes. And I should say upstream, that I just talked about earlier, largely maps to scope 3. For those of you that know, that's the sort of supply chain emissions sort of category. Generators is unique in the technology space in that maps to scope 1, and that's things that you've directly burnt to create emissions directly from using fuel. Scope 2 is electricity use, so that's the direct things. And then indirect cloud services and SaaS and managed services are scope 3 because they're part of your supply chain. But the challenge we often find when we talk to clients is they don't have a nice way of comparing. And there's so much greenwash marketing out there, I'm afraid, where it's just like, just move to the cloud because moving to the cloud is greener. And it's like, It can be, but if you don't do your due diligence and you know, check what your current position is, maybe not. A little quick example of this: we work with a Scottish client, and in Scotland, those of you who don't know, we're often disconnecting wind turbines from the UK energy grid because there is too much wind and not enough demand. And so if I find Scottish clients going, do you know what, we're gonna get rid of our data center in Scotland and we're going to move to the cloud, I'm like, please don't think that that's a sustainable choice, because you're actually reduced demand in an area that has plenty of supply of electricity. And if you move it to the cloud, you're almost certainly moving that workload to Dublin, Amsterdam, London, where the carbon intensity is often 200, 300 grams of CO2. In Scotland, often it's only 5. Most of the time, it's less than 90 grams of CO2. So this whole story about just move to the cloud, it depends, right? And so this is the point of this, is to try and give people fact-based, you know, kind of scientific backed approaches to actually work out whether what they're planning to do is more sustainable or not, rather than just following the hype, which says just move to cloud and everything's cool. I'm not saying that cloud migration isn't more sustainable. There are many, many cases where it is, but I'm just saying it's nuanced, and you need to better compare apples with apples, and that's hard to do right now. And then finally, the last category of this is particularly relevant if you're a big consumer organization. So if your technology is consumed by millions, if not billions of users, small changes and optimizations to your technology can have huge knock-on impacts to the end user consumption of your services. So end user devices can be consuming more electricity if your software is badly written. You can also force people to have to buy a new device if you don't support, you know, older versions of platforms like phones and so on, which again comes back to the upstream emissions that I started talking about at the beginning. So, yeah, and then there's also the network data transfer and downstream infrastructure. So if you're an organization that's, you know, providing industrial control systems or other things like that, the kind of choices you make in your technology and your architectural choices are going to have ripple effects for the end user consumption. So the idea here is it's that big picture view of your decisions that you make as an architect, whether you're a business architect or enterprise architect or technology architect. Like, kind of just don't get absorbed with this energy efficiency piece in the middle. Think about the bigger picture of what hardware are you going to be using, or what services are you going to be consuming, and what is the end knock-on impact going to be to your end customers. So yeah, that is the piece of work that we've been doing, and this is the tech carbon standard. So yeah, Daniel, back to you.
Okay. Many thanks, Oliver.
I'll stop sharing.
Yes. Yeah, I think that was a really great overview. Thanks a lot for this. So let's discuss a little. So maybe a question directed to Wendy first, to make the tie to business architecture, and then we can sort of, let's say, open up the discussion for a few minutes. So how's the tech carbon standard that Oliver just talked about? How is that sort of related to business architecture? Maybe in other words, how may a business architecture lens help deal with the technology landscape as suggested by the tech carbon standards? Any thoughts on this, Wendy?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Maybe I share a slide for backdrop just to recap what we sort of always talk about on business architecture here. So just in this space, business architecture helps sustainability from a couple really important angles. One is intentional design of organizations and ecosystems, and really giving us these macro level frameworks to look at what we're doing from the business perspective, designing around reusable components like capabilities and value streams, and embedding sustainable concepts across an entire organization. And the second, and these are like kind of two sides of a coin, the second is translating change. So as we have direction or goals or improvements we want to make for sustainability or otherwise, the business architecture again shows us this design and said, how do we actually want to change this design? And then the capabilities, value streams kind of take us through this process of organizing our changes at an enterprise level so that we're doing those things in a concerted way, and gives us this golden thread from, you know, strategy and goals and objectives to the value streams and capabilities, the building blocks, to our initiatives and solutions, right? So with that as a backdrop, I guess the way I see this, and can't wait to hear what you all think, The technology carbon standard, I think, gives us the deep dive into the technology landscape, right? The technology view. So that is a lot of pieces and parts, right? And so the business architecture brings it into a macro level business context. And it's not just any context. It's not just one thing one person made up. It is a business architecture is a shared view across the business, or created and owned by the business. So it's something we've all adopted and we share a mental model around. So I think we can, for example, as we look at, Oliver, just putting all those pieces and parts around the applications or the data deployments or the infrastructure, what capabilities are those enabling for the business, right? And that not only gives us context, but it also gives us aggregation, right? So we can see what's the environmental impact of customer information or customer analytics or product design or transportation or money movement, right? And we can make decisions, I think, based on business priority, business differentiation. Of course, the capability is, it's also this Rosetta Stone. It's this connector to everything. So we know this capability is touching which stakeholders, or what value does it deliver? What is experience is it contained in? And I think the other thing is that, if we look at metrics by capability, it holistically allows us not just to look at tech impact, but also other impact. Let's say vehicle management, right? We can see the technology impact of that, but we can also see what percentage of the fleet is electronic vehicles, or what's our utilization and things like that. So really bringing it up to a holistic level.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Wendy. So, Nana, Oliver, any thoughts on this? What's
I guess
Wendy just highlighted?
Come back to what Wendy was saying. I think that what you describe is the holy grail that unfortunately most clients aren't mature enough. They'll have like an asset inventory for their technology, and they'll maybe have capabilities over here, but they won't necessarily have that linking glue. And it's exciting when we work with clients who have the data that can map that kind of infrastructure and those components that we've described on the TCS to the capabilities, to the value streams, or to the services that they offer. But I have to say that I think, unfortunately, many organizations are still not quite there when it comes to that level of inventory. So I know I totally agree. And I guess what we're trying to do is just provide a kind of taxonomy that helps align the sustainability world, which talks about greenhouse gas emission scopes of 1, 2, and 3, and like the landscape. And then I think, ideally, you optimize your application portfolio and your landscape by looking at what's the efficiency of application A versus B, and should we retire B in favor of A, and all that sort of good stuff. So I know I totally agree. I think unfortunately, though, a lot of organizations aren't quite there yet, but they need to be.
Yeah. And maybe just to add on that, Nana may also have something to share, but what you're saying there, Oliver, that rings true. But I just want to bring up again that this is not just about sustainability, that look of, the business tie to your technology portfolio. It's also enabling the exact same thing that every business is trying to do, which is agility and managing complexity and managing total cost of ownership. So there is such a power, not just for sustainability, but also just from a pure business perspective as well.
Totally agree.
Okay, well, then I'd say let's get back to what we've just been discussing later in the session. And before giving all this another thought, let's first maybe, take a sort of step back and wonder about, where and how to establish any sustainable IT considerations and practices in an organization. So essentially, it's Nana's turn now to share her view on sustainable IT. So could you talk a little about, maybe some steps to go through to establish clarity on how to approach sustainable IT in an organization, and maybe where in an organization's IT activities does sustainable IT awareness need to be raised? Where might things need to be changed in order to reduce the IT-related carbon footprint? So the stage is all yours, Nana.
Thank you very much. Can you see the right screen, or is it? Can you see like a full screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you, Wendy and Oliver, for really interesting perspectives. And Daniel, thank you for inviting me for this, and also for all you listening out there or seeing this webinar later. This is important topics for me. So as I have a motto in my little company here, which means let's be part of the solution, not the problem. So that is my whole approach of the way that I work and the way that I advise. Because we all know that we have a problem. We all know that we need to do things differently. We need to rethink the methods in how we work every day. So why do I think that I have something to say? Well, I have worked way too many years and many gray hairs in the technology sector. And one of my biggest drivers for this is that I grew up in Greenland. My mother is from Greenland. And I have this enormous focus, since Greenland is the symbol of the world is changing immensely. The ice is melting 4 times more than the general average in the whole world. So for me, this is a very, very important topic. And then I happen to be a technologist working 10 years within the architecture sphere, both from all levels, as Daniel described. And I got more and more passionate about the idea of what can we do to be part of the solution and not the problem. Because Europe has waken up and smelled the roses. You know, between 2015 and 2024, as you can see, we have the Paris Agreement, we have the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, we have the EU Green Deal, the ESG, we have the Fit for 55, the CSRD is the latest one, and then we had the COP28 just agreed here in very recently. So as you can see, within a very few years' time, suddenly we have to live up to a lot of new legislation in Europe. And this is also spreading out. I know your last webinar, you talked about CSRD, which is number 6, because CSRD is going to be the one that makes it transparent in the large organizations for now, later also expanded out in other countries in 2028. We need to be transparent about how much we emit when we develop our services, when we develop our products, and also in the way that we operate our business. So suddenly we need to go from the linear economy. We did that. Then we went over to the recycling economy, and now we are forced by legislation to be able to work in a circular economy atmosphere and platform. This regards all of us, and this is why we need to change the way we work. What is the point of this? The point of this is that we need to have minimal take from our beautiful planet and minimal waste. So that is the whole point. And that is also why we as technologists, business architects, IT architects, we need to make changes. Okay. This is a framework I made because since I've been working in the atmosphere of enterprise architecture, which is very, very close to business architecture, where we try to map a holistic point of view, the way that we want to, you know, how do we make target business roadmaps? How do we make governance around that? How do we make target architectures based on the business strategy, etc.? So basically, then when I moved over to IT leadership, I realized that when you are out, so I've been practically living in that sphere for 10 years, and then going to the development, being responsible for IT development, and I realized it is extremely busy. Many decisions taken every day. Priority, priority, priority. Always too few people to lift the burden of work. So I thought, okay, how can I frame this? So I'm going to try to Speedy Gonzalez go through this model. Let's see how far we go. And Daniel, please jump in, because I can talk from now on till New Year's Eve and we don't have the time. Thank you. Okay, so this sustainable IT transformation framework for IT development is defined for me, but like the first part you will do when you start your work in the end-to-end IT process is that you need to define, so what do you want to do? You have, if this is actually already where the whole perspective of sustainability starts. You need to create your value propositions in the light and the perspective of sustainability from the very beginning. This means that when you, for instance, when you do your strategy, first of all, you saw all the different legislation that we have, and there are many of them, as you can see. They need to somehow be ingrained and, ingested into the way that you develop a green enterprise architecture strategy, aligned with the business goal, the business architecture, and legislation. So that is the starting point. Why is it important to have sustainability within that? Because if you don't have like this foundation from the beginning, that now we're starting a whole new development. It could be if you work in an agile setup, that would be, for instance, epics, a roadmap, and you have epics, and then you define your epics, and then the whole process starts. So you need to put some measurement points in how you work with enterprise. I'll share it a little bit later. So let's go to the conceptualization phase. So you here in the conceptualization phase, you start to mature. Okay, I'm gonna start an epic. Something is born from the roadmap of the company. So the first thing I would do as a product manager, I would conduct a life cycle assessment. What does it mean? It means that when I have a new business epic, I define the business epic from the point of view that from cradle to grave, how is this new epic gonna affect our environment, our earth, our CO2 emission? That has to be a part of the development of that epic. So then you go and you evaluate. That is, from my perspective, very important. And Oliver talked about it a little bit before. That every time you start an epic and you have an idea what you want to make of a new solution, then you already know, okay, if it's a new solution, typically it will be attached to an existing landscape. So what is the first thing you do? Well, you have to find out and evaluate if there's anything within that solution that you might have to rethink the service contracts and think, okay, is there anything related software or hardware in that epic that will be related and part of that solution that needs to be renegotiated? This is a bit hardcore. Sorry to be a little bit hardcore, but really, if we have to change, we have to change from the existing. So when we gain something new, that's where number 3, you execute a certified sustainable procurement. So let's just say we have an idea. We already have some parts of the solution. We have an idea. What does the service agreements look like? Do we need to make negotiations in order? Because as the vendors say to me when I'm out talking to conferences, they say, Nana, if my customers don't have any if they don't, have any requirements about how much CO2 or anything, any green requirements, I'm not going to deliver that. There won't be any products in my pipeline, in my backlog to service you in a different way if the customers don't ask. So that's also why, let's say we have in the maturity phase, we have a new solution that has to be attached to some existing landscape, right? So you need to use the sustainability standards. There's loads of them out there. One of them is called the CTO certificate. You can use that. What does it help you with? The CTO certificate will help you to, from sustainability criteria, assess the vendor based on sustainability standards. So don't forget, in the conceptualization phase, when you have an idea about, okay, this solution, I have an idea about it. I know exactly what other solutions it will be part of. So Now I also need to put the criteria, because that means that when I start the dialogue with the chosen vendors, I already have my requirements clear based on the the sustainability procurement standards. Number 4, if you get some new software or some new hardware, ensure that you already have a sunsetting plan. Because if something new is coming in, I have seen it 1,000 times, excuse me my sharpness around this, but I've seen it. It's like, okay, then we found out many years later, we have so many things sunset, nobody know anything about it. It's just using energy. Don't do it, please. So do for anything new, software or hardware, please ensure like you already have a sunsetting plan for it in a circular perspective, in an environmentally sensible way. And also, if you need to get rid of something that has to be sunset, ensure that you do it in a very conscious e-waste conscious way, so that Oliver was just touching upon it. It really breaks my heart, but it's true. We have a lot of e-waste, and it is so important that in our we're in our working process, that this is super clear that we handle this in our work process. So let's go to the design phase now. Right now, we have gone so far. We have defined what we want. We know the strategy. We have picked the fruits of the legislation, the business strategy, and we have also picked the fruits of the business architecture targets. Now we're going to the design phase because we have conceptualized the baseline. Okay, so now we go a bit deeper and we dive into the assessment. So basically we sit down. Now typically it will be, the enterprise architects will be finished and they will kind of move it over to the solution architects. So the first one is that when there are different super important people involved in the assessment process, making sustainable solutions. The first thing you would look at, you need to make a user experience typically. So you need to make a user journey. You have to have an idea of, how is this going to work? What's going to be the experience for, and so the first thing is to craft an energy efficient user experience. And that is, I don't think that we can get through all the other slides. I think that we will probably only have time for this model. But I have, different examples of how you can do that. There are some very specific things that you can do in order to be more sustainable in the way that you make user-friendly solutions. There's something about font, what font do you use? What colors do you use? How do you store it? Things like that. So there are many good things. Then you go to the, maybe if it's a web design solution, you could use eco-friendly web design principles. These principles are all out there. When we look at the assessment phase here, all of these different elements are already out there on the internet. People have made some really good work around principles that you can actually pick from, and it's beautiful if we do it because it will make changes. So the number 3, design sustainable architecture. There's this, the Green Software Foundation has made some beautiful sustainable architecture principles that anyone can use and take from today, this moment. Go do, please. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just saying it's wonderful. It's already out there. There's some really good work. So please don't hesitate to look it up on the internet because there's so many good principles that you can already use. The same when we go to AI, because AI is one of our biggest energy, how can you say it? It requires a lot of energy, which requires a lot of water, etc. So if you have to prioritize and you have to start simple in your work process, in the end-to-end IT process, please prioritize this one. If the solution has anything with AI, please prioritize those principles. These are so important because they can, there are different options. One option is that you can move your deployment to a greener grid. You can do it in a green data center, which is very sustainable, and You can use less data when you do your deployment. There are many methods you can use. Please look it up. It's very important, this part. The last one is also ensure green data management. That is one of the things I found the hardest while I was out there in the field. I found the hardest that we have so much duplicate data. We have so much data that is never ever used again. You know, we have warm data, hot data, dark data, cold data. We have different classifications of data. In many organizations, I think it's about between 60 and 80% of data is never used again. So please be conscious when you design your new solutions, especially if it has AI in it. You know, be super critical about delete everything that you don't need from the beginning, because it will also just be stored somewhere and just use energy for no reason. Now we're moving to the implementation phase. And
maybe Nana, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt you. Maybe try to keep the two final ones short.
Yes.
So let us save a little time to discuss afterwards.
Of course.
Thanks.
Okay. So the implementation phase also make energy efficient solutions. Use optimize the way that you code. We all know that we have a big room or a big archive of bad coding. We all did that for many years, many organizations. It's not a secret. But when we do this and we choose consciously to work sustainably, we should use green coding methods. Also, you can find it on the internet, also part of the software foundation. When you test, it's also important that you don't just test without being coordinated between when it's a big organization. It really matters how you deploy and how you test. Do you deploy asynchronously or synchronically? Be super aware of how you do it. So we go to the release phase now, the last phase where we go into operation, and that last phase is basically to utilize the benefits from FinOps and GreenOps. I won't have the time because I can see Daniel is smiling a little bit to me, but please do go and look up what does it mean to work with FinOps and GreenOps, because it all matters in the whole chain of this development process. And the last thing I want to say about this slide here is that from the beginning, try to establish a data visualization of the end-to-end IT development process. Because if you do not include these elements as some kind of data visualized overview, then you'll never know whether the next solution and the next one is actually going down with energy usage. So that was my little contribution. I hope that it was not too complicated. I would have loved to go through with some concrete examples because this is just a model, but we don't have the time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Nana. So now, Oliver, Wendy, any general thoughts on what Nana just talked us through, and then maybe more specifically, again, to make the tie to business architecture, any views on the role that business architecture could play in making sustainability an integral part of an organization's IT activities, in line with what Nana just highlighted with this framework that she took us through? And maybe one addition, might that have something to do with the holistic blueprints of the business, with IT activities being part of what we are used to call the business? So with such blueprints being provided by business architecture, giving us the organization-wide context to determine what needs to change. And Wendy already touched upon this slightly earlier.
Yeah. I mean, I'll perhaps touch on what Nana presented in general. I largely agree with what you've just presented. I think there is some nuance in there that we've been finding in our projects, that like coding efficiency versus machine efficiency is a really interesting one that we maybe don't have time to explore now, but like considering like the pressure that you might have from your organization to ship quickly, and therefore choosing programming languages that are kind of less efficient to run, but actually allow you to ship software releases more fast. It is an interesting kind of dilemma that I think we're going to be facing into in the future. Like, I don't see people jumping back to C and lower level languages because it's more efficient, because the productivity and the release cycle will obviously slow down. But I think, Daniel, to your point around the business architecture piece, I think there are so many ways in which business architecture helps here, right? Like just having a clarity of the capabilities and not having a sprawl of technology solutions that you're not clear on what they do for the organization. Like that's the number one thing for me of the business architecture connection, right? Is like, what have we got here in the landscape, and do we really need it, and what's it supporting, and is it significant? And I think to your point about driving the requirements, Nana and Daniel, like just having like business architecture become the champion of ensuring that these considerations are a real first-class citizen, right? Because this is the thing I find is like, if you're not careful, it's always about ship, get the next product, get the next service iteration done. And I think having business architects be the custodian of these values is super, super important for me. So those are the observations I would give to start with.
And I'll just pick up on both of your points there. Oliver, I love that sustainability should be a first-class citizen in this space, just like security, just like other things. And I think architecture and architects, due to our systemic thinking, that holistic view, everything we've said here really allows us to do that. And I also think we lean a little bit altruistic, that we want to do what's best for the organization. So some things that you said, Nana, that I really liked, embedding things. And I like to ask, like, where do we have the biggest teeth, the biggest muscle, the biggest impact? And I think some places are definitely architecture principles and guidelines and, decision making to help business and technology understand, how do we not do these things in the first place? How do we design in the right way? I also think procurement, as you said, vendors and solutions is an extremely important place for us to dig into. And as I've worked with organizations, I've seen some pretty impressive policies more recently that have a lot of teeth. Like if you buy the 37th ERP system against our architectural and solution principles, that's bordering on irresponsible. So I'm seeing some good things there. And I think another good one is in the initiative life cycle where things are getting funded, approved, scope, sequence, and having business architecture oriented assessments there where we can say, which capabilities is this initiative focused on, and what is it doing in terms of tech debt, and what is it doing in terms of environmental impact? So just a few thoughts.
Nana?
I just have I very much agree about, normally I didn't go through that model, but I have a model where you go through a different steps, 5 steps, in order to get clarity on what is most important for your particular organization. Because for some organization, procurement, for instance, people having a multi-vendor strategy, big organizations like pharma companies, finance companies, etc., they typically go for multi-vendor strategies and that is so for them that will be like have a huge impact. That's where the low hanging fruits are to reduce their CO2 footprint. Other organizations, so you need to tailor what has to be prioritized as the go-to actions in order to reduce it as much as possible, because every organization has different. For instance, the finance sector is super based on information technology. That's their products, that's their services. So they might be more like the whole, they might have like a more even priority than, for instance, companies with a multi-vendor strategy. So it depends on the organization. So you need to kind of adjust it for the organization and make that assessment first. And I do agree, business architects are super vital in this, the strategy phase and the maturity phase. Absolutely super important people, because those are the ones that can help, turning business strategy into action, and conducting a life cycle assessment and help, having the view from the business side, before it's actually being conceptualized from an enterprise architect or a solution architect. That transition, because if we don't think of sustainability already from that part, forget about it. We need it from the beginning. So sorry, when I so agree, business architects are super vital in this process, very much. Thanks.
Okay. Let's maybe move back then to what Oliver introduced earlier with the Tech Carbon standard, and take another look at it as it relates to business architecture, and maybe more specifically to what Wendy let us take a brief look at with business architecture's role in strategy execution. Yeah? So suppose the technology estate has been assessed using the Tech Carbon standard. Could business architecture actually help act upon the findings from such a carbon-related assessment of the technology estate? And if so, how could it do it? What do you think? So Oliver, please feel free to go first yourself, but you're all welcome to share your view on this.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's an interesting question, and I think that the Tech Carbon standard was primarily designed to help bring together different stakeholders into the room, right? So the problem we were finding is that sustainability professionals would use greenhouse gas protocol sort of language and sort of kind of other environmental metrics. The technologists in the room would talk about technology stacks, applications, vendors, etc. And then and I think the role here of the business architect is, and structures like Tech Carbon standard is to try and bridge that gap, right? Because you've got some very niche fields here, very important fields, but they need navigating. And I think this is where the beauty of business architecture comes along, really, to sort of knit these things together. And I think, yeah, if you do a TCS assessment either on the landscape or on a particular set of business capabilities or a particular application, then ultimately the business architect can perhaps take that and go, right, we now know what the situation is. Let's now try and roll that into the roadmap of change and execution going forward. So it's just providing that sort of, I think, visibility into what the challenges are. Because I think right now, most people want to do the right thing, but they have no clue what the actual tangible things, what the tangible challenges are that they're running into. Is it energy consumption? A lot of people talk about this energy consumption thing, but in some cases, actually, no, it's the fact that you are doing such rapid, perhaps, product releases that you are forcing upgrades in other parts of your ecosystem that you're operating in. So I think the business architect kind of view is super helpful for helping zoom out and say to like very niche people, that's fantastic, but here's a pragmatic kind of path forward.
So well said. And the only thing I'll add is, as you're saying, if we are looking at a set of capabilities, working it into the roadmaps, the changes we want to make, that capability is what brings everything together. So we can also say these other initiatives are planning to act upon that, which can identify conflicts, right, on what we're trying to do. Or we might even say, hey, we're trying to do this. Can you just put that in your initiative, right? So it really brings it together and harmonizes the work.
Okay. Let me check how much time is left. Just 5 minutes, so we're close to the end. So maybe it's well, I'm afraid it's already time to conclude. So to all of you, Wendy, Nana, Oliver, are there any final thoughts that you would like to share? Any sort of takeaway messages you'd like to leave with those who joined us for this session today?
So I'd love to echo what Wendy said about the capability view and making sure you use that to kind of help deduplicate, because I think for me it's the one most perhaps not obvious, but the one most powerful thing I think that the business architecture view can give you is, and it's another reason why you should think about rationalizing in the landscape and simplifying, right? The sustainability lens, the cost lens are those two quite powerful forces that we can use in those conversations we're having with decision makers to make and improve things. And the last thing I guess I'll quickly say on Tech Carbon Standard is it is open source. If people watching this want to get involved, I'd love to hear from you. Like we don't want just to be a Scott Logic thing. We want this to be a global cross industry thing.
Yeah, I agree with the capabilities part. I worked the 10 years I worked in as an architect. Unfortunately, we tried to introduce capabilities, and the business were not ready for that. That's why I needed myself to create like some kind of, all the people being involved in the process. How do you make it real for them to be an advocate? to make that little change that makes things different. I believe myself that capabilities is very important, and it requires that, you know, organizations are a bit more mature. So I think that you still should use that as a baseline, and it's really a really good tool. What I think is very important is that, you know, let's, for me, my message and my key message in all of this is that whatever role you have working as a business architect in the business, as a business analyst, you know, user experience person, solution architect, operational person, it doesn't matter. We are all part and should be part of the organism for change. Changing, you know, whatever you have as a professional work, you know, you can easily look online and find out, you know, what little thing can I do differently. And honestly, at the moment, we are not mature in the EU or in, you know, measuring the CO2 emission from software and hardware is already very difficult because people have different measurement methods. But don't, you know, don't make that a barrier. Just, you know, investigate and go do it. It's great work. You know, everybody can make a change.
I think that's really well put, Nana and Wendy. I think it's in line with what a particular theme that we had sort of throughout all the episodes, the previous ones, right? Partnership.
Most definitely. Partnership, lead from any position and partner and support each other to bolster the efforts. Absolutely. And maybe my last words too are Ellen MacArthur, right? The problem starts with design, and, you know, the solution is design. So Oliver and Nana, back to what you were sharing around becoming circular and regenerative. The business architecture helps us to entirely rethink our business models and how we work together in business ecosystems and create even better value than today, and make sure we keep all the materials and energies flowing. And the other thing I'll say, I think as architects, we can also help people to a little bit more fully appreciate the current state, not just from the measurement as we've talked about, and not just the business context, but by helping people to understand that abstract, like my device becomes waste, my device is generating energy. So I think we have a role we can do to visualize and make that even more tangible, as well as helping people to see the future, not just saying, don't do this, we're measuring that, but saying, this is what good looks like, this is what's possible, and really inspiring people to do their part, as we say, to get to there as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy, Nana, Oliver. I think it was a really great session with lots of valuable insights to learn from, and I very much enjoyed the conversation with you. Many thanks for this. And thanks to everyone for joining us today. And again, I hope to see you again next time. So goodbye, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much.
Thanks
Take
so
care.
much.